Hello and welcome to the Nirvana Strength Practitioners Panel Podcast. I'm MacLeod, the co-founder of Nirvana Strength. This podcast series is really focused on human performance optimization, and we define it as the process of applying knowledge, skills, and technologies to improve and preserve the capabilities of humans to execute essential tasks. Kind of a mouthful. But essentially, we are wanting to become the best versions of ourselves, physically, mentally, spiritually, relationships, whatever the arena might be. So today's podcast, we're joined by Devin Kelley, and this is actually the first time we're actually recording on video. Hey, so this should be a good one, and we'll get into Devin's bio really quick, and he's going to talk about himself, which he'll do a lot of today. But really quick, just to give credit to the venue that we're at the Haven Suites Bali Berawa Hotel, which is located in Canggu, Bali. It's in a prime location. We're really right next to the beach right now, and it has everything to make your trip epic in Bali. Of course, coming to Nirvana Strength also will make your trip epic, and you can train with this guy. Okay, so the topic for today just focuses around the idea of human performance optimization. And there's no set topic with what we generally discuss. We kind of see how the flow of the conversation goes, and but I think with Devin, we'll be able to kind of delve deeper into the psychology of practice, but in relation to not even just has to be fitness focused, but we can talk about how it relates to life, how it relates to the growth of the human being, and I think a lot of the things that I like to discuss are, if someone is not even necessarily into fitness as much as we are, health as much as we are, that they can essentially still take what they hear from this podcast and still apply it to other arenas of their life.
Sure.
So we'll start, maybe for those of you that don't know you very well, beyond seeing your big-breasted chests, bare-breasted chests on Instagram,
much to the chagrin of the algorithm.
Yeah. But you had Instagram basically start blocking you, right? Because
I haven't really been able to pin down all the exact reasons, but perhaps that's one contributing factor. Is that I'm shirtless often.
You should put some of those tassels on. Maybe they'll.
Star stickers.
Okay, so Devin, if you would tell us a little bit about yourself.
So I guess a brief overview of where I've come from in terms of physical practice background.
Yeah.
Started in soccer. That was my first sport. Played that all the way through high school.
I played a little bit too.
You did?
I mean, just for a couple of years. Where in the States?
Yeah, in the States.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, around the New Hampshire area.
New Hampshire.
New England.
I'm from New Hampshire.
Well, how do we not know this about each other?
I don't know. I was born in Portsmouth, but I only lived there for for 3 months.
Yeah, you told me that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, but so I was grew up around the southern New Hampshire area.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then started in soccer, went to track in high school as well. Took that pretty seriously. That's when I got into programming, because I kind of had to develop my own system.
Because the coach is not very developed there. Or?
Yeah, essentially. So it was really small school, so we had volunteer coaches.
Oh, okay.
And they were one of them was an ex-cross country athlete who had just run in high school. He wasn't very serious. He was kind of half retired, older dude, super nice guy, but just kind of a volunteer coach.
Yeah.
The other one was a construction worker who was also just volunteering. He was responsible for coaching the sprints and stuff.
Yeah.
But he didn't have any experience in it. And I wanted to run the 1, 2, and 400.
Okay.
So I had to kind of come up with my own program and system if I wanted to get serious about that. But ended up coaching myself through New England championships. Got to New England championships and kind of bit the dust because I got a flu that day. So I never went beyond New England's, but I won state championships in the 400, got second place in the 200. That was about as far as I went, and then ran track through college, transitioned into yoga, and then from yoga into the movement practice I do now.
Okay.
And that was across the span of living in New Hampshire, and then North Carolina, and then China, and then here.
Yeah. Okay.
That's kind of a 1,000 mile an hour overview.
No, it's cool, man. So there's definitely a lot of things that we've had just through all of our discussions, like quite a lot of similarities. And it's, I mean, I didn't go off to a foreign country, and well, I did go off to a foreign country, but I didn't.
Here you are.
I didn't isolate myself in as much as I suppose as yourself. Was that intentional to get away from everyone kind of in China?
It was
that 5-year period.
Yeah, it was. I was specifically looking for a super rural area where I could just kind of remove myself from the daily grind, and also where the cost of living was extremely low, so I didn't have to pay, like exorbitant amount for rent, and because Shanghai is pretty expensive. That's where I was living before, and then I was traveling around teaching workshops. Realized that I didn't want to spend so much of my time teaching, and I wanted to turn my focus back to being a student, being a researcher, and so I just wanted to remove myself from that, and ended up staying there for like 3 years, just practicing every day, researching, climbing. Yeah,
I think that's quite an interesting process, and I think that's a big, definitely a big step that a lot of people wouldn't necessarily take with regards to wanting to actually become very high, have a high level of competency and abilities within their own industry before they would start actively trying to disseminate information and try to do workshops, right? So like most people, they would kind of, even if they were wanting to become better as an instructor, they kind of do it in conjunction, right? So they would do workshops as much as they could, but they would also be balancing those two. But you just almost solely just stuck with learning and then becoming a better student, maybe workshops here and there, but maybe not to the degree that you could have. Was there any particular reason why you wanted to take more of just that approach?
Yeah, I have a couple reasons. I think I saw clearly that it was an obstacle, that I was spending so much. It was an obstacle to my learning and the depth of my learning, that I was having to spend so much time just making money and supporting myself. And I almost didn't even have to. It was just kind of a program that I was in, where I was like, okay, I got a workshop opportunity. This studio contacted me. They offered me to come. I'll just go, because it's an opportunity to teach and it's money. And so I was like, okay, why not? But then I started to have an answer to that question, why not? Because, well, I could be setting aside some money, as much as I can, just to survive on a basic level, and spend all of that extra time that I would be investing in elsewhere just in my practice. So I wanted to spend as much consolidated time or concentrated time as much as I could in the actual practice. And secondly, I think I was kind of like, in the back of my mind was this old book that I read. It's called Once a Runner.
Okay.
And it's about this kid who's, he's trying to go to the Olympics eventually. In the end of the book, I won't give the end of the book away, but that's kind of the direction that he's going, is toward the Olympics, as a distance runner, as a miler actually. And so this kid, at one point in the book, is finally like, all right, no more bullshit. Like, I'm gonna go to this cabin in the woods, and nobody knows where it is. I'm gonna live by myself every day
and become a runner.
And he's running on these back trails, just every day, with nothing to do, nothing to focus on, but just eating and running every day, and just and living and like fixing up the house, And it's kind of a romantic book in that way, because it's very purist in the sense of like.
Well, it kind of sounds very similar to you saw that movie Solo. Free Solo. Free Solo. So I mean,
Alex Honnold.
He took it. His desire to, what was the mountain that he wanted to climb again?
El Capitan.
Yeah, El Capitan, right? Yeah. So like that was his like holy grail of to be able to free solo that cliff face.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Multiple cliff faces.
Yeah. So, but if anybody gets a chance to go see the free solo movie, like he does this, right? He's basically just shuts himself off from everybody and just focuses on his craft to the highest level he could possibly do it. Do you feel like though, like that there are some things that maybe could have improved quicker if you had done more workshops? So like the actual like practicing the application of instruction did you find that there was like a transition period from having done 5 years and then trying to apply everything that you've learned? Because
I think all in all, I think it was a pretty good balance. Like I felt like I was teaching enough where I was continually refining my skill set, because I would go off and I would teach a 5-day workshop, and then I would come back with that money and live on it for a period, for like a month or 2 months.
And then like each workshop you were just constantly like upgrading and
that's right.
like improving. And
I feel like for me that was a great balance. It gave me enough time to kind of refine the process, and every workshop was so different because of that, and it was evolving very quickly. And I feel like if I had less time in between workshops, that the progress wouldn't have been as fast.
You did enough. So those workshops were essentially your testing ground.
Yes.
To get better.
Yeah. Sorry, students. You're my guinea pigs, kind of. But I was honest. I was really putting in a good effort to make sure that I was doing it in a safe way, and I wasn't experimenting too much. I was testing everything very well before I was implementing it into my teaching protocols. But at the same time, could I have refined my teaching methodology and my actual teaching skill set more if I were teaching more often? I think so. I think I could have. But the time that I was using to be leisure time as well was extremely valuable for me, emotionally speaking, in terms of healing my psyche and like, the shit that we go through for 25, 30 years before I ended up in that position is it's a lot to unpack. And if you never, just like refining your craft, like if I had never spent the time away to do that, I think I wouldn't, like, sometimes it requires that focused effort in one place, undistracted, focused effort to kind of move through some of that stuff. And so I'm really, really grateful for that.
Yeah, period. I mean, that's a big, for a lot of people when they're, so like, let's say in the States, we go through this kind of generic process of, we go through our primary school, we graduate, we're supposed to go to university, we get a degree in some topic that we, for some reason, decide that we think we have interest in, but in the States,
it was only like,
it was like, in the States, generally only like, wasn't like 25-30% of people that graduate in a particular study actually go into a job that's related to that study.
Yeah, maybe even less. I don't know the percentages.
Something. It's super low.
Pretty low.
Pretty low. So then we end up going into, so like my first job was in, because my major was in interpersonal communications.
Yeah.
I ended up going into like sales and at a telecom company. Yeah. It was my initial job, and it was like I got into it. I was in that job for like 6-8 months, and I was like, this is horrible. This is like the worst thing I've ever. I was like, people do this for like forever. Like, this is so bad. And so so for me it was it's either I was either like immediately going to go back to school and get my master's and study more, or I ended up going to Korea and taking advantage of an opportunity, being from America, having a degree and being able to instruct in English. And so that generally provided me with the amount of free time to actually start working more on myself. And then eventually I got into university, which that was like the holy grail of teaching English jobs, because you only worked like 15 hours a week. You had I had 22 weeks a year paid vacation, and all my free time was basically doing what you were doing for like the 5 years, was like you're just studying and improving and trying to get better. I just happened to be in a very distracting environment in Seoul.
I know a lot of climbers that got into the professional world that way by teaching English at a university. Not a lot, but a few, that were they used their time like that, and they ended up getting sponsored.
I had quite a few friends who would work for a year, work on their craft as much as they could within that time, but then they would save so much money after a year that they could essentially take like a whole year off. And then they could just like work on their craft for like a year. But I think for most people, it's taking that leap, right, to be able to just be like, screw it, I'm not going to do whatever it is I'm doing anymore.
That mindset is so far away from the average person, I feel.
To actually take the leap, to actually do...
Well, not even a leap, but just to have the mindset where I'm like, okay, I'm gonna work for a year and then take a year off.
Oh, what I mean...
And focus on my craft,
Yeah, but I would say that... like how many Americans in general, well, one, even have a passport, right? And then two, like, would even take the step to even, let's say, come to as far as Asia, where most people would probably stay in, like, Europe. So I think there is... but even still, like, how many... I mean, even... let's say compared to yourself, and then maybe not necessarily go as extreme as finding a rural area for 5 years, but being able to put so much time and energy into one craft, not saying that it's very specific, because it's actually everything that you do is actually quite broad, and it applies to so many different realms. But even take this critical thinking process to the next level, and not just following just random systems that are kind of out there. But I think, I mean, was there a tipping point for you? Like, what made you decide to actually go to China and actually get away from everything and want to actually focus on your craft? How old were you when that?
Well, it was 2014, the end of 2014 when I went to China.
Okay.
And the reason for going there was completely different reason for wanting to, so I was already in China for like a year and a half before I decided to settle down in the mountains and retreat from everything.
Sounds like a movie, man. Okay, settle down in the mountains. Okay. Yeah.
To use an old-fashioned term.
Yeah.
I kind of did settle down. I found a girlfriend who I'm still with now.
Yeah.
And so, but yeah, like life slowed down a lot, and every day was simple. But yeah, so I think the reason for that transition was different than the reason I went to China.
Okay.
So probably focus on the transition into moving into the mountains.
Yeah.
I think that was like not one tipping point, so to speak, but multiple tipping points that were more or less the same realization.
Turn off the AC.
Yeah. It was more or less the same realization happening again and again, like a punch in the face. But it took me getting punched in the face quite a bit to realize what the message was. Yeah. Like, I was teaching yoga at the time, and so I was showing up to these yoga studios, and I was already sort of avant-garde within the yoga community because I was teaching stuff that wasn't really in line with traditional yogasana, and my perspective was way different. I was at the point where I wasn't even teaching any yoga philosophy anymore. It was all sort of psychology and mindfulness practice that was non-denominational, so to speak. And so I would show up to these workshops again and again, and trying to teach under the yoga paradigm and under the name of yoga, advertising myself as a yoga teacher, marketing myself that way with yoga pictures.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And then showing up, and the things that the students were taking away from the workshop were not what I wanted them to take away. And in my view, which is okay in itself, like everybody takes away something different, but that's not what I mean. Like, in my view as a teacher, what they were taking away was not actually productive. And then also their expectations of what they wanted to get out of the workshop were actually way different than what I was offering. And so they were leaving the workshops quite disappointed in some cases, or at least the ones who were able to reorient themselves during the workshop were surprised, and then they were appreciative toward the end of the workshop. But it took them 5 days to warm up to me, you know what I mean? And then I wasn't getting the kind of feedback that I wanted that told me the students were really grasping the material. So after getting that punch in the face multiple times, just like, hey, they're not getting it, hey, they're not getting it, hey, you're teaching under a false guise, and you're misleading people with your advertising and marketing strategy. After I got that message multiple times, I was like, all right, I've got to change something. And I kept putting it off. And then I accidentally overstayed my visa due to a technicality with my second company that I worked with in Shanghai. They didn't go through the process properly. Sure. Long story. But anyway, I overstayed my visa technically, had to pay a fine, left China, which it's harder to get a new visa once you overstay, So I ended up stuck in Hong Kong for a period of like 2 months trying to sort this out. And luckily I had a friend there, so it wasn't like crazy expensive. I could stay for 2 months. So I used the money that I would have been spending and the time that I had, because all my workshops had to be canceled in China because I couldn't go back. So I used that time to start the reorientation process. Yeah. I was stuck there, so I was like, I might as well. Hired a gymnastics coach, started working on the rings, started working with Miguel Santana and the hand balancing. Started training myself in weighted calisthenics and calisthenics, doing YouTube research every day, trying to figure this thing out. Okay, how am I going to reorient myself around practice here? Because I knew what I was doing wasn't in line with what I wanted anymore.
So do you think if that visa issue thing hadn't happened, would you still have made the change?
Yeah, for sure, but maybe it would have been later.
Yeah, probably.
I would have kept teaching. Maybe it would have been more gradual as well.
Yeah.
But I'm glad that it did happen all at once, because there was a level of authenticity that came with that.
I think this is a good. I mean, it's a perfect example of someone taking taking a at face value probably a bad situation, right? Like, I mean, I know I've definitely overstaying visas is quite something that happens to a lot of people, but then also not being able to go back to that country because of that issue. But
I lost a lot of money and canceled workshops, man.
Yeah,
it was like a year's worth of income that I was canceling. I had to cancel like 5 or 6 workshops.
Yeah, but I think being able to, sure, maybe the initial effect of something bad happening is it sucks and you have to think about it, but trying to make the most, and of course people would use like the whole expression of making, making lemonade out of lemons, right? Yeah. But it is true to that, like there's so many situations where all it really does is just takes a different perspective on what, could provide you, right, with this opportunity to expand or delve deeper into the crafts that you want to. And so not everything, particularly if it's something that's not in your control, like obviously, if they're not going to give you another visa, it's not like really something you can't do anything about that. So but that's kind of one of the things about stoicism that I really like, is that with regards to like your emotional state and your situation in life, is that all you're doing is causing yourself more harm by worrying or putting an emotional state on a situation that you actually have zero control over.
Right.
But in your case, actually taking some action that makes it work to your advantage, and now I think your practice is quite phenomenal, and I think but I can always see is like no matter how good you get, like you have such high expectations on yourself, and I think most people should have high expectations on themselves to continue to make improvements and make progress, and that this idea of perfection, or in our case at the Nirvana gym, right? So this idea of Nirvana is not something that we will attain, but can we get to the best possible version of ourselves? And I can see it in your practice, no matter how good people will see like your Instagram stuff and how good you get, you can like, there's like the other day you like kicked over a bunch of my equipment because you were pissed off about I don't know, maybe you missed a rep or something like that.
I have moments of sort of pure guerrilla frustration like that, but in general, the reason I find myself very interested in the practice and refining the practice over time is not so much that my standard raises. It does as a consequence of this, but it's more because with each step forward that I take, the practice becomes a better medium for insight, and the insights become more profound, more transferable and deeper, with each sort of layer that I peel back. So with physical practice as a medium for life insights and for general movement insights, as like in the way that Ito is using practice, but also just living insights about being a human being and having a body and having a brain. I think practice never gets boring or old, and it always gets more interesting the deeper you go, if you use it in that way, right? If it's like
if you're actually engaged in the process,
right? But there are also those moments of trying something again and again and then it's interesting because you find yourself. I find myself, even though I actively orient myself again and again toward that kind of insight-based practice rather than skill acquisition-based practice, I do find myself caring about the skill acquisition, because it's like you try something again and again. You think you've understood something. These are my moments of greatest frustration. When I think I've understood something and I've integrated something into my practice and my body, and then just through shortcoming of memory or through shortcoming of physiology or my brain not being able to process, I either forget it or I fall short, and it's like I knew that or I figured it out already. Why can't I keep going? And those are huge lessons for me as well, because it's like those are also the moments of biggest frustration in my personal life and my emotional life. It's like, oh, I thought I had figured out that communication error I was making. I thought I was done making an asshole of myself in that way. But actually, I have to learn that lesson like 5 more times before it's really integrated, you know?
Yeah. It's yeah, I mean, there's definitely some instances in life where you can learn the lesson fully. Maybe it only needs to happen once.
Sure.
So like the idea of not maybe if you're like a little kid and you like touch the stove, you're not gonna like, I mean, unless you're like just really slow in the head, you're probably not gonna keep touching the hot stove like 5 times before you be like, oh shit, I shouldn't set the hot stove.
I don't know if it's politically correct to say slow in the head.
But yeah, but there are some like maybe not so extreme lessons. So like smaller lessons that probably do need to take more practice, or needs to happen more often before we can actually internalize the mistakes, or internalize the lesson that we get from it.
Yeah, the repetition is important. That's one thing that I think yoga offers to some extent, but that I was missing to the degree that I have it today. Is just the sheer amount of repetition that goes into developing a new pattern or breaking an old pattern. Yeah, it's quite a thing.
So with the idea, so like, okay, so going back to you taking so much time to study your craft, to get better at everything, I see personally, like in the fitness industry and with a lot of the kind of normal everyday kind of instructors, people who just get their new 200-hour yoga cert, people who get their new like personal training cert, where they have a certain level of confidence in their competency, but are maybe lacking deeper understanding of the material they're actually studying, or how to actually apply everything.
Or experience and applying.
Just general experience, right? Where do you see like some of the biggest pitfalls with regards to instructors in the fitness industry, and where do you think that they could improve better, as opposed to just saying like, oh, you need to get more certifications, which theoretically is supposed to be like getting more education, but the idea of just getting more certs, I mean, I personally don't think it holds water. Like it just it doesn't,
I agree with you,
doesn't equate good coaches. I mean, some of the best coaches in the world, some Olympic level coaches, world-class coaches, probably have 0 certifications, and they've just been ingrained in the process and having the experience of actually producing a performance results.
I think where most people are falling short in that is there's 2 points. One is pretty much the one you just made, in that people are having a hard time critically thinking about their own process of learning. It's the same with university. Like, why do I have to pay, $30, $60, $100,000 a year to go?
Fuck, man, I paid so much money
to go to. We all. I mean, didn't we all? Right?
Yeah.
Man, and I was lucky enough to have some help with that, and also I got a scholarship through track.
Yeah.
But like, geez, it's a lot of money. Why do I have to pay that much to have a quote experience, or go to some place and subscribe to all of these pieces that I'm not really going to find useful, or not really going to find applicable to where I'm going, like gen ed courses. I think that's I get the idea, like I get it, but don't just do that in high school. You know what I mean? Like that we should be done with that by that time. We're 22 years old, 20 years old by the time we go to college, 22 to 24 by the time we get out.
Yeah.
Like at that point, there should be more of a selective process open to us. So like what I tell people, that if I had to go back and do it again, what I would have done with the university process is I would have not paid the tuition. I would have written a bunch of professors around the world, if I had to, that I respect highly, and even if they're in small universities. If I didn't reach the top professor that I wanted, I would go down to the next one.
Sure.
And say, hey, can I audit your class? You don't have to grade my papers. If you want to give me feedback, you can. I'd greatly appreciate it. But I just want to learn. I just want to come and sit in. Can I audit? And then if I wanted to spend money, I would have done that through personal mentorship with professors, not through, and then you can still spend time on the university campus. You can still make friends. You can still get to know people. You can still sit in the classes.
Yeah.
But don't waste your time, So I think that mindset of like critically thinking about the way you're engaging in your learning process is also missing from the way coaches educate themselves. Like you don't have to get a bunch of you don't have to get A, B, and C and D certification before, that everybody else thinks you need to be qualified in order to be qualified. Like you could think like, and also a lot of the information that people are trying to pay for is available for free.
Now, even more so with the way internet is. I mean, there's so many courses, even basic, there's a full anatomy textbook that's free and available. I'll post it into the notes, but that I sent to all you guys, and it's like an amazing textbook and very straightforward and free. And I wish it was as developed as it was when, I guess, when we were in school.
But then, if you're going to pay for a service, if you're going to pay for something, pay for somebody to teach you how to sort through that information. We're not at a lack of information at this point.
No.
We're at a lack of ability to critically think and sort through it and organize it and apply it. You need to pay somebody who's going to teach you how to do that. Don't waste your money with somebody who's just going to provide you information that qualifies you to be certified in something. You need to have somebody that will help you organize it and find a direction. That's what I would say most people are falling short on in terms of educating themselves as coaches. The second point is mindset. And that has to do with the psychology aspect that we were talking about before. With the motives behind practice.
Do you feel like there's a lot of people in particular industries that say they, I mean, I feel like there's a lot of people in the industry, no matter what the industry is, but it's not actually it's not where their true passion is. You find that, like, I've had a lot of instances where, like, you go to like a global gym and you meet a personal trainer who is, saying they want to work in the fitness industry, they want to be a trainer, but they're really hoping that their client doesn't show up. Because they want to earn the money, but they don't actually want to help their clients get any better. They just kind of like skating through the process, I guess.
Yeah, I've been there, honestly, as a yoga instructor. I would have like private lessons, or I would have classes at a studio, and like nobody showed up for the class, or it was an odd time or a holiday, and I'm like, yes,
get paid and know how to teach.
I'm like, wait a second, where's that coming from? So I think it's like, what happens there is that they like certain aspects of it, like so. In summary, they're not clear on their values, and they're not clear about how they're not fully in alignment with their own values. So they value part of the position, they value part of what they're doing. Like, I like the fact that I can be physically active during my job, or I like the fact that I can be helping somebody. But then there are other aspects of the job that are out of alignment with their values, like they're not working with the kind of clients that they want to work with, or maybe they like the idea of being physically active, but being in a gym setting just isn't for them. They'd rather be outdoors or something like that. But something's out of alignment, and then they're not willing to step back and be like, okay, what is out of alignment? Where am I falling short? And how do I start cutting off that and reorienting the career to fit me, instead of trying to like push myself into a career that kind of fits and I'm kind of out of alignment? And then that's where you find people that are like, oh, I'm so relieved that I don't have to do my job today, because it's 60 to 80 to 90% out of alignment with what they actually want. They just settled. That's my perspective on it.
Yeah, I think it's but it's easy to, but I guess in everything in life, right, it's quite easy to settle. It's quite easy to fall into a routine. And I mean, even the fact of having to, even if let's say you have a job and you want to do something different, the idea that someone has to even retype their resume and retype their CV is like, that's so much of a barrier that they just don't want to look for another job. Or even having to go through the interview process, like, so
sure.
Even I mean, I think it's an extension of people having a fear of public speaking is being interviewed. Confrontational situations, or being questioned on your merits.
Yeah.
I think is it can be a quite difficult process, even for those at higher levels. I mean, that's maybe to some extent why some people would not want to be in a not necessarily a debate situation, but in a situation where they have to actually show what they know.
Yep.
I think a lot of people would just rather be kind of like hiding in the shadows.
Yeah, there's that psychological aspect of it, but there's also, I think, like the work ethic part of it. Like you said, some people don't even want to go through the process of reformatting their CV because that seems like a huge obstacle or task.
Yeah.
And like you can probably relate to this as a collegiate level athlete, you develop kind of a large work capacity. And I remember when I was running track at my university, and then I remember the time that I quit, and at that point I was used to doing 3 sessions a day plus full-time studentship plus part-time job at the university.
Yeah.
And that was like, I don't know how many hours a week that was, but I mean, there's basically no free time. It's just sleep. That's it. And even you're cutting back on that. And the rest of the day was just mentally and physically active. And during those 4 years, I developed such a huge work capacity that when I finally quit the track team, I felt like Superman, because I had all of this time and all of this energy. I could sleep like 3-4 hours a night and not give a damn. You know, and I was like fully functioning, fully on. I could read for like 5 hours, 6 hours at a time without breaking, without looking up from the book. My focus was just superhuman. And so, anyway, my point is that I think a lot of people don't have a work capacity and don't really know what it means to actually go through a trial or a confrontational process or a difficult thing because they've never practiced it. Because they haven't been brought up in that, especially now, culture's getting softer and softer, man, I feel like.
There's definitely, yeah.
People don't know how to work hard.
So yeah, going back to the idea of being a collegiate athlete, like I remember, so not only did I have obviously, you have your practice being like 2-3 hours, then you got film, which is like another 1 to 2 hours, then you have your own workout, weightlifting session, which is another like 1 to 2 hours, then of course you got your studies, but then you got your job. So I had a job at the university in one of the offices. I was also working in the kitchen as a cook, so doing burgers and shit.
Just making it happen.
You end up spending so much time like just constantly grinding.
Yeah.
And there's definitely a lot of people that don't have. I mean, I'm not saying that like that's like the hardest of all situations, but they essentially don't really experience any or significant enough hardship that allows them to create this capacity to work harder and to go beyond what is comfortable.
And that's sort of on like a macro level, right? Like on a scheduled level, but even like on a micro level, like an individual kind of like moment to moment experience. I remember we did this workout, right? It was 25 by 400.
Okay.
And so 25 so 400 meters is once around the track.
Right.
For those of you who are not familiar with track measurements. So we did that 25 times on a 2-minute interval, which means you've got 2 minutes to run 400 meters, and then whatever time is left is your rest.
Yeah.
And we were running this more or less on like, some of us were averaging like, 65 to 67 seconds for 400 meters, intervals 25 times. Is brutal. Is a brutal anaerobic threshold workout for like 5K, 10K athletes. Yeah. And you get to a point in those workouts where it's just so painful, and so your whole body is just telling you this is dangerous. Like you're hurting yourself, and you should stop now because your life is in peril. Yeah. Like please stop. Every second your body's asking you to give up.
Yeah. And
to have to fight through that 25 times in the course of half an hour or an hour is like, you find another gear, man, and it teaches you something about those moments when you're like, oh, I like, not to say that it's inherently good to force yourself to do something you don't want to do, but I mean, it's not inherently good to force yourself to do something you don't want to do. But in those moments where it's just a resistance to doing the work or overcoming something that takes work to get past a certain point, if you don't know how to find that gear where it's like, oh, I don't want to be doing this, I'm already tired, or I'm already, then having that kind of training or that kind of experience will teach you to find that gear in any moment, and once you cross that threshold, there's no going back.
Yeah, I mean, it's not, I mean, it's definitely against our, essentially as humans and just what, I mean, you want to, it's easier to be lazy and not put yourself through actively put yourself through difficult situations. Sure. Through just actual nature, you're kind of forced into very hard situations, so you're forced to adapt.
Yeah.
But to be in a completely safe environment and then to actively get out of that safe environment and actively put yourself into a dangerous situation, that goes completely against the grain of what essentially what us as humans would do. If an animal knows, so let's say house cats and house dogs, right? They know they're completely safe on the inside. They might not necessarily there's definitely, and I've had some friends who had house dogs where they're just as soon as you open the door, they just never want to leave because they're just scared of what's possibly out there.
Sure.
And I find that, but this is an interesting process that I think is very beneficial, and we do it all the time. With regards to training, is you're actively putting yourself in situations that will force yourself to adapt and force you to grow, and then one of the things about having the jobs in university was, and I worked one summer for 3 months at Frito-Lay. Yeah. And I was a chip packer. I just packed bags of chips all day. 8 hours a day, all I did was just pick up bags, just the same movement. And the way they would change the process for us is that there was lines, and each line had a different chip, bags of chips. So one line would be a 99-cent Doritos bags, and then the next line would be the $3.40 family size bags. And so that's how they would break up the monotonies. Every hour they would just make us change lines.
You get to look at a different bag.
But they would not stop the lines. Yeah. The chips would just keep coming. You'd have to run to the next line.
Yeah.
But jobs like that, or I worked as for a construction company. Yep. Laying down rebar. So rebar is just big long pieces of metal, and laying down foundations for this middle school, and it's Texas heat, so it's 40 plus degrees Celsius, and you're on tar, and just the worst jobs you could have. Sure. I even worked a little bit on an avocado farm, bend over backwards, I mean it's just horrible. But those really bad, those really hard jobs, you stick with it for 3 months, whatever. Now I'm working as I was working as an English professor, and it's wow, this is easy, this is so. But then what I come to find for me personally was that job became so easy that I hated it. I didn't like that it basically kind of forced me to be in a very I didn't have a lot of opportunities to grow in that job. Yep. And I think this is where people get tired of their jobs, right? If there's no opportunity to grow.
I think it's also, to an extent, people can find ways to alter their effort and alter their mindset in whatever thing that they're doing so that it does equal growth. I'll go back to the same example that I was using, that workout that we did, the 25 by 400. Yeah. It's possible to get through that workout and give an 80% effort and then feel okay, that was really hard and I'm so satisfied with that. Yeah. But then our coach, Scott Simmons, would add what he called hammers.
Okay, hammers.
And so the hammer intervals were the ones where you just go. And so he would add them though, he would add them at rep, what was it? I guess 16, 18, 24, when you're already super fatigued and wondering whether you
finish your rep and you
keep
just
going.
Go right into the next, or?
No, it's So you get like halfway through the workout, and that's when the hammers would usually start. So we'd throw in like 2 or 3 hammer intervals, or sometimes anywhere between 1 and 4 hammer intervals during the workout, and they'd start somewhere beyond the halfway point. And what it is the interval stays the same, but during that repetition, at this point you've kind of found your pace. Okay. So you're running like 80% effort, and you're like dead after the interval, and you're just trying your best to catch your breath before the next one. The hammer is when you choose a number interval, and you just pick it up to like 89% or 95%, and you just run it pretty much as fast as you can. Okay. Fast enough that you can barely come back for the next one and try to get back on pace.
Right.
So maybe it's like you're running like 64, 64, 65, 64, 66, 65, 61 is the hammer, 62, and you just try to crush it for that one. You put the hammer down, basically. That's what it is. And it teaches you like something about the mindset that you're in while you're doing the workout, which is basically like, I'm doing the best that I can. I'm doing the most that I possibly can. This is already very hard. I'm just going to survive. I'm just going to get by on this rep. I'm going to keep this pace. But actually, when you actually try, there's way more there than you think there is. And you can put the hammer down. And I mean, that's just one silly example, but like you can do.
But it applies
small
so
things.
Much. Yeah. Because I mean, you find it even in the simplest of examples, like of people training by themselves versus training with a workout partner.
Yeah.
Like, you could do the same exact workout, but most people, when they get with a group, get with a partner,
there's another gear.
There's another way bigger gear. And so, this idea that, we're thinking about actively putting ourselves into difficult situations, or actively trying to force ourselves to grow mentally, physically. Like, we have to think of, no matter what our perceived capacity is, that we always want to do more than that.
Sure. I mean, you can use anything as a medium for this kind of work. You know what I mean?
For sure.
Like, you're just like, even if you're working on a Doritos line, or you're working. I used to work as a product photographer. Just like snapping photos and like next product, product. No windows. Just in a room all day. For 10 hours a day. Just all right, here we go. More shoes.
But I think there's a monotony too. So there's high-level professionals in most sports understand that the most basic fundamental aspects of what they do, though they may perceive, the average person would perceive them as to be like the most boring part, are probably are the most significant and the most important parts of what they need to perform. So like for us, even just basics of scapula movement and positioning, like, and just practicing that one small component, how much positive or benefits it would have to your overall product. We think of, I don't know, something as monotonous as picking up bags of chips and putting them, like, this idea of perfection, you could do it more perfect the next time if you really wanted to get down to.
There is a degree of correlation, right, between repetition and insight. This was kind of a very Chinese perspective. Like, you just stand in the middle of the room and do the same punch over and over until you figure something out.
Well, this was I think one of Bruce Lee's quotes was like, I don't fear the man who has done one kick or 10,000 kicks like one time. I fear the man who's done the one kick 10,000 times.
Right.
Something along those lines.
Right. Yeah, same principle. There is some, I mean, I think that can be exaggerated to a degree, and maybe even like mythologized in Chinese philosophy. Like, they think that it's like a path to enlightenment and stuff like this, and to a certain degree, like, you repeat something so much that suddenly you have an epiphany. I think it's possible, but probably there's a point of diminishing returns there.
Sure.
But the principle still stands, for sure. Like,
so I think, though, that this kind of leads me into the other kind of thinking with regards to movement nowadays, where we see there's almost like an argument against specializing. Becoming a specialist. So the whole Ido Portal kind of movement practice now is a lot of it's focused on the general, like becoming a generalist. Do you see, like, who sets the line or like how do you decide? Well, not necessarily who sets the line, but who just like how do you decide on where's that line between like maybe you don't do 10,000 hours of one thing to become a specialist, but maybe you do 2,000 hours of I don't know 5 different things, right? I mean,
yeah, I know what you mean.
I do understand the argument with regards to like becoming a generalist and becoming good or better than average at a lot of different things, but I think though it's still like you're still missing out, like you're still not getting to the full potential of, even if it's just one particular arena, like you still don't experience the higher ends of practice.
I mean, I can't really summarize his argument very well because I don't know him personally, but from my perspective and what I see from the generalist discipline is they're almost not, they're intersecting issues, but they don't intersect quite as much as we suspect. I don't think the generalist practice is giving up on the idea that repetition equals insight. I think that it acknowledges that, but it's moving away from repetition for repetition's sake, or specialization for specialization's sake, and asking, what can we get in terms of self-development and learning and growth by focusing on the underlying principles and the underlying patterns beneath the skill acquisition process? Not so much just doing the thing until we gain the skill and that's the end goal, but rather, how do we distill something that's a little bit less tangible beneath that process so that we can get better at things across the spectrum of skill sets without actually practicing those skill sets directly? So largely like transferable attributes. I don't think that perspective. I think that perspective is very useful, and I also at the same time I don't think it disregards the repetition as insight or repetition.
Well, it doesn't necessarily have to be like about repetitions, but do you think
that's essentially what specialization is, right?
Yeah.
It's just greater number of repetitions.
Well, it could be that, but maybe in combination with more advanced movements.
Sure, yeah.
Relative to that, so like let's say, what is it? Ski jumping.
Yeah.
I mean, you obviously once you get to the point of the Olympics where you're just jumping off of this like massive slope, where like the smallest, tiniest mistake basically leads to death.
Yeah.
So that would be like the ultimate high levels. Do you think most generalists though? I mean, I would see the benefit, of course, like in the way we approach our craft and the way we apply what we learn is this idea of like learning the underlying principles and how can we apply it to new skills. I don't think that's common amongst most fitness enthusiast sort of professionals, right? They're more focused on just learning the skill and then like they're focused on that skill. But is there, maybe for yourself, is there a specific part of what you do that you have more focus on than others? Like, would you say you're a specialist of anything?
Yeah, I mean, there's limits. I think the difference is like the limits are the limits that I set, or the boundaries that I set in my practice, are more of a medium as well. Like they're for a specific purpose. Like to say that you're a generalist in movement would be without any parameters at all. That's what the word I was looking for, parameters, not boundaries. Without any parameters at all would look, I mean, just, you don't know what it would look like. It'd be ridiculous. Like what kind of movement? Like facial muscle movement? Like there's like, or like, there's just so many different kinds of like breath work, or, the
tango dancing.
Tango dance. Like there's so many different ways that a movement practitioner can look in terms of the external manifestation of their practice. I don't think that matters so much as it does the mindset and the approach. Like what we're actually looking at when we're practicing. Like, I mean, you can't help but refer to Ito's work, because it's just he's asking questions like when we all come together from these various disciplines and we're all practicing what look like distinct disciplines and practices, but we're kind of all concerned with where the learning principles intersect, and where we can all kind of gain from the similar kind of practices in our different fields even. So yeah, in terms of things that I focus on personally, there are parameters, but those parameters are set with a specific purpose in mind, and also acknowledging that I could just as well do something else and be getting similar insights. I just happen to be doing this.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a very important distinction for most people to better understand, is that, you know, it shouldn't just be about getting more certifications, which in essence is they're trying to just gain more skills, but to actually learn basic, I mean, even if it's just on a very basic level of principles that would allow them to have a certain kind of mindset that applies to a wide variety of disciplines, and then they can kind of decide personally like what those specific disciplines are for themselves. Because I mean, even in fitness, right, there's just so many different things you can get into. I mean, you know, yourself, you have a specific array of exercises and type of movement that you're really focused on, but yeah, there's no reason why if you just maybe you bump your head and then tomorrow you're like a salsa dancer, and you're just applying those same principles though, right, to whatever your chosen craft is.
Or I'm in a horrible accident and half my body's paralyzed, right? And I'm like, okay, what do I do now? I'm just as confident that I could move into, let's say, engineering or marketing or app development or something, and I could still be using the same principles of learning and development that I'm using now, just in a completely different field. I would be just as happy doing that, because it's the same practice, just a different medium. I just happen to like this. I think having a physical body and moving your physical body, super nice. Like it's just really fun. It's interesting. I think it equals intelligence development to a certain extent, because our brain and our intelligence kind of develops and functions in relationship to the perceived trajectory of physical objects, including ourselves and other objects. So I just happen to find it to be a very useful medium, but it's not the only medium, and it's certainly not the only medium I could be happy using as a medium. Yeah. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think, I mean, for me, like I don't do it anywhere close as much as I used to, but I really enjoy, let's say, like I enjoy cooking, I enjoy making food, and if for some reason, I don't know why, but maybe say I wanted to start my own restaurant or whatever, but if I wasn't in the fitness industry, in the health industry as I am now, there would definitely be some other interests that I have that I could apply a lot of the same principles. Yeah. And
I think that's the measure of a good practice. Yeah. Whether you can use it.
Yeah. But so I think this is like, but people tend to kind of completely miss the mindset portion, right? They're just learning a bunch of skills, right, or getting a bunch of certs. They're like just completely they only do stuff purely for the fun sake of doing it. They just enjoy doing it. Sure. But have no reason as to, they're not actually improving in that, right? They're not growing in, like, let's say if I just enjoy cooking, but I keep making the most horrible food ever. Sure. And I'm just like, I'm not getting any better, right? I'm not improving. But I think, applying that, a specific mindset to actually grow within whatever it is you're doing, where if you enjoy surfing or if you enjoy watch collecting or whatever it might be, like, you can actually apply this mindset, become better at it and grow at it. And I think that's where most people, I think that's kind of what most people are missing in their day-to-day lives, right? It's this idea of growth.
Yeah, I mean, luckily though, the good news is that that's a mindset shift. It's not necessarily something that you need to take years to develop. I mean, it is a skill set to a certain extent to be able to use whatever medium you're using and make it broadly transferable and applicable to other disciplines. That is a skill set that you can develop over years and years and get better and better at, but to a certain extent, you can just start that immediately right now.
Yeah.
There's nothing that has to change, or there's no skill set that you have to develop to take that mindset. You can just start doing it. Like, hey, I'm more interested in the underlying principles behind this learning process rather than I am the actual goal of the learning process or getting to the skill set at the end.
Yeah.
If you take that mindset from the beginning, then whatever you're going to be doing is going to transfer well to other things, you know.
So I think this is kind of like we just keep talking about. There's this mindset. There's this. These are these learning principles that you need to know to become better at everything, and there's probably a lot of people who's like, what the fuck? What is this mindset?
What is the principle?
What are these principles? Do you think there's like an ultimate set of principles that people can follow, or do you think that there's going to be slight variations of them depending on the person?
I think it's both. I think it's the greater the principle, the more it will encompass. Like, for example, if you look at the Chinese principle yin yang, that's an example of a very high principle because it encompasses more or less an entire worldview, an entire view of the universe and how everything works from a macrocosm to a microcosm. That would be an example of a high principle. But I think there's degrees of variation the more steps you go down there. I'm not saying that that's that yin yang is the correct interpretation of the universe, but I'm saying that it is one sort of like, you know, visualization principle or organization principle that we can use to make sense of things that would be an example of a high category principle. So I think it's both, but as you go down in degrees from that, there are multiple kinds of principles. I was just talking with Casio today about Casio's a student at Nirvana Strength. He's practicing the hand balancing that we were working on in the workshop that I gave at Nirvana way back a couple months ago, 2.5 months ago now. The 5 satisfied principle.
Okay.
Right? And he's like, man, you know what I realize is like all this stuff that we're working on is really about life. You know, it's really about like, it's actually about learning to be, learning to cope with actual challenges and scenarios and move through. And I was like, what do you mean? He's like, well, you know, the 5 satisfied principle. I was like, yeah. He's like, you have to relax first, you know, before you can do it. Like he's like, the principle is you've only got one thing to focus on. Like you just kind of like, you reduce the complexity and then you focus on one thing at a time. And in order to do that, you can't be holding a bunch of unnecessary tension in your body and like, you know, doing 15 things at once. Just choose something, relax, and go for it. And then when you get it, and that then comes the repetition, you repeat it. And then when you get it through repetition, you move on to the next skill. And then you start to accumulate skills and piece them together. And he's like, that's basically how you would tackle an obstacle or a task. And it's like, that's exactly what it is.
So even, I think, I was just listening to Jordan Peterson talk, just to give an example of like, like let's say you just had a stack of papers at work or a stack of bills, and the last thing you want to do is attack this entire stack. But really, if you just took it one piece of paper at a time, even if it took you, you know, I don't know, 10 days to get through the stack, I mean, at least you could, it would be much, after each paper that you grabbed or each small task you completed, the task as a whole wouldn't seem as so like unsurmountable.
That's exactly right, but it's also that way on a more macro level as well, because the average person is like, oh, my aunt keeps calling me, and I have this, and my mother wants this, and I also have to go to the bank today, and I also have to pick up my sister at the airport, and I don't know what to do with this problem I have with my spouse, and my car payment, and I can't handle all this shit at once. And they're going into their day, if they have a clear sense of what they value and they still have all these things that they have to balance, they're going into their day like this, like,
tense.
They're tense all over in 1,000 different places. And they're trying to, they're like, I'm gonna have a good day, you know. It's like, this is gonna be success, you know. It's like, that's not how you find, that's not success, that's stress. And so you can, I mean, not to say that success, I mean, stress isn't a good behavioral motivator, and it can be, but that is to say that
it's like any kind of stimulant, though. Like it's good in the right portions at the right time.
But I mean, as a we're talking about that 5 satisfied principle, right? If you were to apply that to somebody like that, it's like, well, first of all, most of the problems you think you have are actually just fabrications in your mind. Second of all, if you really get clear on the 5 or 6 tasks that are in line with your values today, and you still want to balance those 5 things, okay, well, let's just pick one. And prioritize, what's the most important one, which one comes first, okay, focus on that, or maybe 2 at a time, right?
Sure.
Relax.
Relax is a big one.
Go into it, start doing it, but you got to relax so that you can focus. And just the same thing as the speed work we did in my workshop. You got to relax so your arm can move. If you're tense before you go into it, you're slow and stupid.
Slow and stupid, or just slow and slow. Yeah.
Yeah.
I definitely think there's a lot of those. That's what I like about the idea of like focusing on the underlying principles, focusing on what your values are in the decisions that you make, because we're always going to be in a constant mindset, or we're always going to know more tomorrow than we did today, right? So we're always going to be in a process of growing and becoming more knowledgeable of obstacles or situations, or how we should have handled things in the past. But I think for a lot of us to be able to progress in a way where we limit the amount of let's say unnecessary regret that we might have in our lives is to have the understanding that we are making decisions with the most amount of knowledge that we have at that time, and then also if we can make decisions based off of what we truly value at that point in time, though those values may change in the future. We can at least say that we did the best with what we had at that time. And I think coming with this. Sorry?
It's like the Bryan Adams song.
Yeah.
Cuts like a knife.
But so I'm sure, compared to when you first started your journey in China, like the principles in which you were practicing and applying all your knowledge and applying just everything into your own physical practice or your own mental journey is maybe at that time was the best it could have been.
Sure.
But now I'd probably say it's probably significantly better than what it used to be. But we're always in this refinement process, right?
Yeah, and regret is a really interesting kind of emotion. It's at once an emotion and a narrative, but it's kind of an interesting emotional phenomenon that we experience that I think can be a really, really valuable guide for like the question of what is regret, where does it come from, and how do we live in a way that minimizes our regret in an authentic way. If you look at so I always answer this question from the standpoint of values, and I think that people they experience the most regret when they're out of alignment with their values. And it's not like, I didn't do enough or I did too much. It's no, I did something or I didn't do something because I was reacting to fear narratives.
Yeah.
Like that's where it comes from. It's like, I held back from what I was capable of because I was afraid of this outcome. Or
there's so many situations.
I was afraid.
There's so many situations where people know what they should be doing,
yeah,
but they're afraid of actually doing it. Yeah.
Well, they have some story that they're telling themselves that
the monster's going to get
dictates me. That it's something bad will happen, or I'll end up in this position that I don't want to be in, or I'll repeat this trauma in the past if I do this thing, or if I don't do this thing, and then afterwards, when they're looking back on that scenario, that's always when they regret it, when they were in reaction to that instead of going for what they value. And when you look at I think storytelling is a huge teacher in this regard. Like if you look at I love anime for this reason. You're familiar with the anime One Piece, right? You may have never seen it, but it's like the pirate anime. The main character has the round eyes and the stitches below his eye, and is wearing a straw hat. Anyway, super famous anime.
Okay.
Maybe you're too old.
One Piece. Yeah, maybe.
But yeah, so One Piece is a story about a young man. It's a typical shonen anime who goes. It's a story about him growing up and trying to become the king of the pirates.
Okay.
In search for the ultimate treasure. And what's interesting about this main character is that he's he is bullheaded in a way that he doesn't know how to live out of alignment with his own values.
Yeah.
He would rather die than live for a second out of alignment with his values. He's just the kind of character who's just, he wakes up and he's 1,000 miles ahead. 1,000 miles an hour straight ahead, go, and then fall asleep. And just eat and fall asleep, and then go 1,000 miles an hour straight at his goal, and that's it. And as soon as something feels like it's out of alignment with his intuition and his highest values, he can't rest until it's corrected.
Yeah.
And as a consequence, he has absolutely no regret in his life.
Yeah.
And so that's a really extreme version of it, and I think we probably have to take a more realistic approach in our actual lives. But it's an interesting case study or thought experiment, right? To say like, okay, that's what it would look like in the extreme. And so we can use that as a guiding principle to say, well, perhaps living in alignment with our highest values and not merely reacting to our own fear and cowardice and weakness that's what's going to allow us to live with the least regret, you know?
Well, I mean, a lot of the fear that I would say that we experience, right, is based off of worrying about a situation that is probably more than likely not going to happen, or something that is completely out of your own control.
Yeah.
Right. So even if you just go to the basic principles of acting on the things that are within your control, and those that are not, kind of let the chips fall where they may. I mean, and then when, let's say, instead of spending 10 days worrying about a possible situation that probably will never happen, or even if it does, instead of worrying for 10 days, maybe you take some action to improve your situation, or improve the less likelihood of whatever it is you think might happen.
I think that mindset can be useful, and that advice can be useful, but honestly, there's probably too much potential for being misguided even within that principle. Like, okay, so there are X amount of things that are that are undeniably out of your control.
Yeah.
And there are Y amount of things that are undeniably something you could do something about.
Right.
But even within that scope of the Y things, there are so many things that you could potentially be doing.
Yeah, of course.
And then there are so many motives behind each of those actions. How do you decide which of those actions are going to be in line with your highest values, and which of them are going to be merely a reaction, again, to fear narratives?
Right.
Right.
So the idea is to narrow down those choices, right? To break it down into what is the most simplest, or what is the action of all the many actions that I could take that would most align with the values that I have.
Yeah. Right.
So I think though, to even get people to even get to a point where they can even understand what are the choices that I can make, they still need to get to that point where they don't even worry about all these choices that are not even possible to make. Like, they're almost worried about these other things. They can at least start to take all these different means of narrowing down what would be the decision I can make that's most in line with my values.
Don't you think that could happen though by proxy, just by getting clear on what is and isn't a narrative? Like what we are making up and what we're not?
Sure.
Just by like understanding the stories that we're telling ourselves about events, and getting clear on when we're doing that, I think helps people automatically already, just by proxy of that practice, to get clear on all the stuff because what you're talking about is basically the things that I can't control.
Yeah.
Right. I need to be able to give up my attachment to trying to do something about those or figure them out, because that's wasting my energy. Well, you're essentially saying, like, I have to be able to bring awareness to the things that I'm making up, the stuff that I'm just fabricating in my mind, or I'm seeing as a problem, but there's actually no problem there, or there's actually nothing I can do about it. And so essentially it's just a narrative that I'm wishing for it to be some way that it isn't, or I'm wishing for it to not to be some way that it is.
Would there be also some argument into saying that you could, maybe if it's done in a very specific mindful way, but can you create these narratives even though they might necessarily be under my control? But this idea of like, let's say if you're going to a battle, right? You're trying to imagine like what are all the also possible outcomes of this that could happen.
Sure.
Taking all this information and then somehow coming to a conclusion of action that you would take to, I don't know.
Yeah, we call that strategy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think this was like one of those scenes in like the Marvel movie where who's the magician guy?
Oh yeah, Doctor Strange.
Yeah, Doctor Strange. He ran through like 1,000 different scenarios. And
or like all of them actually. Yeah.
Yeah.
He spent like 20 years doing it or something.
Yeah. So I think that's quite an interesting process as well. Like thinking of strategy.
Yeah. Again, that's probably only useful though when you've just determined what are your highest values when the fear narratives are absent. Like, and then once you're clear on that, then the strategy question comes into play. Okay, now how can I imagine? Then we're using, what do you call it, speculation or visualization to our advantage as a narrative tool. You know, we're just like playing out different narrative scenarios in our mind, using narrative as a medium to explore possibilities, and then using that as a strategy to move toward our highest values by predicting the future. But the key is that we acknowledge that it's a prediction. We acknowledge that it's a speculation. We're not under the delusion that it's reality. I think that's where most people run into problem is that they don't have tools to distinguish between what is a delusion and what is an actual event that's actually happening. And am I using my narrative as a tool, or is it operating subconsciously in the background and controlling my behavior as motives? So I think when there's no clear distinction there, then people start to run into long-term trouble. You know.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's a really cool process, and I think maybe that's a good place to kind of end it. But sure. I think we'll definitely have some more discussions and be able to delve deeper, and maybe we'll go into more specific scenarios, or even going into like specific situations and doing like a mind strategy game kind of.
I know what you mean.
Yeah, we'll figure something else out. But if you're really interested in delving deeper into like what we've been discussing and want to hear more thoughts on narrative excavation, psychology, learning principles, where can we find you, Devin?
Best place is Instagram. Yeah, Devin P. Kelley, Devin P, and then Kelley with an EY. And you can also find me on Facebook, Devin Kelley, or also DK Movement on Facebook. But it's mostly I'm active on Instagram, and that's the best way to get in contact with me. I don't tend to I only engage on social media minimally, and I find that to be the most effective medium. So that's the best way. And other than that, if you want to engage with me in person, I'm in Bali, and I do private sessions at Nirvana Strength, and also some workshop events. We've got one coming up, the training camp in September, October. Yeah,
that's going to be pretty amazing, I think.
Yeah. So if you have the means, stop by Bali, maybe check out one of the events, or just come train in person, see the facility.
Yeah, and I think it's a great place. I mean, not only being in Bali and being part of this larger kind of community that's very growth mindset, but being able to train at Nirvana and be able to just grow as a human, both physically, mentally, but socially, relationships, whatever it might be. And these are kind of like almost normal everyday discussions that we kind of have with each other,
right?
With regards to learning principles, or just helping each other figure things out with regards to really anything that we're kind of dealing with. It just happens to be mainly movement focused, but
it's kind of rare, right, to have this number of like coaches or people in the field like gathered together in one place who are thinking about practice at this level and like having these kind of conversations, and who are also not sort of subscribing to any particular dogma or what do you call it? Like I guess you call it methodology. Zealotry.
You definitely find a lot of people from a lot of different backgrounds, but the one thing that we all have truly in common is just this idea of how can we become the best versions of ourselves. And it's definitely been a pretty awesome experience having you, Devin, for sure. So thank you everybody for joining us on this episode of Nirvana Strength Practitioner podcast. We'll have more episodes with Devon in the future. And if you want to come check us out at Nirvana Strength on Instagram, or just check us out on the web, nirvanastrength.bali.com. We have a bunch of like events and workshops, some with Devon, and there'll be all great opportunities to not only grow as a human, but to maximize your potential, to help you thrive as an individual, as opposed to just getting by and surviving life. Mm-hmm. So take care, and see you on the next episode. Or not see you, but hear you, or I don't know. It's not see you, really. Yeah, all the
both now, right?
Yeah, now, yes. See you, yes. Okay. See you later.
Okay,
bye.
Thanks, Ian.
Yeah, thank you, Deb.